Shondine Vanderveer Yinashia, Bilagana Nishlint, Achitni Bashichin, Bilagana Dashich Aids, and Anjani Dashinella. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Shondine Vanderveer. I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation and I serve as Native Americans in Philanthropy's Education Resource Facilitator. And I'm very honored to be with you all here today as your host and moderator for today's discussion. On behalf of the entire team here at Native Americans in Philanthropy, we are honored to welcome you to our third webinar within our member-exclusive content series. So whether this is your first session with us or if you're a long-standing member with many panel discussions under your belt, we are very excited to have you with us here today for this talk. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. Very excited to delve in. Today we'll be focusing our discussion on the unique experiences and needs of natives in the city. While we are only recently hearing the term urban native widely in mainstream conversations, it is important to note the reality is that Indigenous peoples have always lived in large community settings, truly in cities of our own making, long before this term was coined. So historically, our ancestors thrived in urban environments, maintaining complex, interconnected societies that were built to sustain our ways of living. However, it is recognized that over generations of forced displacement, treaty violations, and assimilation policies, many of our people have filtered into colonial cities, which has created new challenges and in many ways has redefined the collective experience of natives in the city. Today, the vast majority of Native peoples, over 71% of American Indians and Alaska Natives to be precise, now live in urban settings where the need for support and cultural preservation has grown immensely. As many of us know, organizing within these communities can be uniquely difficult. Unlike federally recognized tribes or reservations, urban Native communities often lack the formal explicit ties that support traditional governance or recognition and support and resources from the federal government. And yet, we continue to adapt, create, and thrive in new forms of collective identity and community. I'm very honored to have the organizations and the individuals that we'll hear from today who are shaping vibrant futures for urban Native communities, both by embracing tradition and modernity. These conversations will explore the pressing needs of our people, the challenges we face, and the incredible philanthropic work being done to create these spaces of belonging, connection, and cultural expression. So as always, we invite you to approach this space with curiosity, with humility, and with purpose. And as we say in each of our discussions, whether you're a funder, a nonprofit leader, an ally who's just being introduced into the space, someone completely new to the conversation as a whole, there's a role for you here and there's work to be done. So again, we are very honored to have you with us today. Thank you. We're honored to be in community with you all, and we encourage all of you joining live today to use the chat to submit any questions that you'd like to hear these speakers answer during our discussion today. I'll either weave them into the conversation as I see fit, or save them for later for our dedicated Q&A section towards the end of our time together today. With that, I'm very excited to get started. Cheryl, Briana, and Liana each bring a unique experience and incredible perspectives to this conversation, and I'm excited to delve deeper into the work that their organizations are accomplishing in the field. So speakers, as you're called on, please take a few minutes to quickly introduce yourself and your affiliations, however you see fit. I'm going to bring to the stage first Cheryl from the Sacred Pipe Resource Center.
Oha, mitaki api na mikoras. Chante washte na pechuzapi. My name is Cheryl Kary. I'm the executive director and founder of the Sacred Pipe Resource Center in Bismarck, North Dakota. And I am Yanktonay Dakota from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's an honor to have you here. Next, I'll bring up Briana. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, buenos and hafaday, guahusi Briana. Hello, everyone. My name is Briana. I am CHamoru from the island nation of Guahan, or Guam, as is casually known. I'm the executive director of the Urban Native Collective in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's a privilege to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Excited to have you. And our third panelist, Liana, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Oh, it seems like you're muted.
Here we are. All right.
No worries.
Hello, Histres Dunkel. My name is Liana Shewey. I am a matrilineal descendant of the Cherokee and Wichita and an enrolled member of the Mvskoke Creek Nation of Oklahoma. I am the co-founder and programming director at Relative Arts New York City, which is a shop, community space, and open studio that is Indigenous led and operated, presenting more than 60 contemporary Indigenous artists in New York City.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. To all three of you, Ahiahat Nitago, very excited to delve into the work that your organizations are doing and the unique communities that y'all are representing here today. We have very large, obviously, cities spread out throughout the contiguous United States, each with their own unique needs and experiences. So I'd like to open up this conversation with giving you each a little bit of time to share both your personal story as you've gone through this work and how identifying as a quote unquote urban native has influenced your experiences in these larger metropolitan communities. Cheryl, if you'd like to start us off.
Sure. Well, I'm the quintessential urban tribal person experience. Like I had that experience. I was just a little res kid growing up in my community in Cannonball on my reservation. When I started high school, we moved to Bismarck, which geographically is only like 70 miles from where I was living, but culturally it was like a world away. When I went into the school system, when we moved up here to Bismarck, I went into the school system. I really experienced culture shock. Growing up in my community, we didn't talk about diversity back in those days. We didn't know, nobody really talked about color, mentioned color. And light as I am, I was just a member of the community, of our tribal community. And so it wasn't until I, encountered being a minority in the high school and just really recognizing that I didn't talk like everybody else. I didn't believe like everybody else. I had a different sense of humor, I had a different way of approaching issues. And it was really an eye-opening experience for me, and I think it's the experience that led me to start the Sacred Pipe Resource Center, because I know that there's a lot of people that even today are going through that same sort of culture shock experience and that same sense of isolation and really just floundering around to find community. And so I always feel like my life was shaped by that moment of coming into this environment and, now full circle helping others do the same.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Cheryl. As you said, there are many in our communities that share similar stories. I myself grew up on the Navajo Nation, born and raised, and now I live in New York City. It's a completely different environment, like you said yourself, that is not built for our ways of thinking. So it takes some time to get settled into it. Absolutely. Briana, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit of your personal story, if you have any similar experiences or something completely different that's shaped your experience as an urban native.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Cheryl, so much for your story. For myself and my story, I have lived in Ohio and in urban spaces my entire life, after my mother and her siblings moved away from our homeland. I think often we think of ourselves as urban natives living in dual worlds or like dual spaces. However, for myself, I firmly believe that I am fully human in exactly who I am. You know, I've fully lived the urban life. I have fully lived with my family and my people and my traditions. But I do understand that, you know, we share in this experience of living in this very fast-paced, ever apparent, capitalistic market economy, and all the while learning and unlearning and learning again everything that already makes us who we are and already makes me the Indigenous woman that I am. You know, we talked about already just briefly what it means to be urban native, to be native people living in cities and towns and suburban areas and away from our original homelands. You know, some of us were born here, others arrived because of relocation, adoption, colleges, jobs, military service, as was the case with my family. And many were forced here through removal. But all of us carry that connection, right? That connection to our people, to our nation. And for me, that's my connection to the CHamoru people, to the Tugong Clan that I belong to from the island nation of Guahan. And, you know, the last thing I kind of want to share is that in my story, being an urban native doesn't make me or anyone for that matter any less native. It means we are, you know, navigating a different context while carrying our life ways forward. It, in my opinion, means reclaiming visibility in places that try to erase us. It means building kinship and care and cultural continuity just wherever we end up. And, you know, feel like that is just so important. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that. And I appreciate being able to share my story.
Yeah, thank you for feeling comfortable sharing with us, Briana. And also thank you for making that very important distinction that no matter where you live, it matters that you're tied to your community. That is first and foremost the most important part. Liana, I would ask you if you feel comfortable to share a little bit of your personal story, identifying as an urban native and how that's influenced your experiences in these spaces.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Indian Territory in Oklahoma, but I was in a college town, Stillwater, Oklahoma. So a bit of an urban experience already where I would live my day to day, go to high school, go to grade school in this college town that was actually quite diverse because of the university there, and it being Indian Territory. There definitely were other Indigenous people, Native people, you know, in my community. But the difference was that I was one of the few people in my school who would spend summers going to the reservation town that my family grew up in, and has had for generations, a house that my great-great-grandfather built in Eufaula, Oklahoma, or on Creek Nation. My mom always described her and her siblings as being very urban native because they grew up primarily in Tulsa. I am often thinking about the legacy of the boarding schools that I know has impacted probably all of us here, and how that my mom and my aunties and uncles are kind of this like silenced generation where their parents were the products of boarding schools and were therefore passed on this kind of like, I hate to use the word stoic because they always use it to describe Native people, but like this like kind of stoic silence where they had their culture like forcibly and violently removed from them and were told that they could not share it. So that was then kind of passed on to my mom and my aunties and uncles. And it was something that I thought was so beautiful, our culture, and being able to go back to the reservation town and engage in going to powwow and just, you know, having these different traditions and eating different foods and hearing different language, like our cultural traditional language spoken. So for me, it's really become being wherever I am, wherever I go, to kind of share the legacy of our culture that has been stolen for a few generations. So I have always kind of been drawn to urban spaces. Growing up in Oklahoma and Indian Territory, I think that I didn't really recognize that I was different, or that, there was a place out there, the rest of the world out there didn't really have that initial understanding of like indigeneity and what indigenous people had contributed to this country, and that these are our lands. And it wasn't until I went to college in Portland, Oregon, where I started to realize, oh, I've got a different story. And in fact, a lot of people don't have a firm grasp of what it means to be Native American or Indigenous in this country. And then I would go on to live overseas in Europe and in Southeast Asia. And again, I kind of continued to confront the ideas, the kind of caricatures that the rest of the world believes of Indigenous identity. So it's been in moving through these spaces that I have found a real need and desire to create space where I can connect with other Indigenous people who have these kind of shared experiences of being viewed through only a historical lens, and asserting that we are in fact here today. We've been here since time immemorial, and we have the ability to thrive. We have our own cultures and our own traditions to share with the world, and to take ourselves out of that historical context. So to be an urban Native for me means to challenge those historicized notions of what it means to be Indigenous, and to be loud and proud and up in people's faces and be like, we are here and we've got knowledge, and you best respect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Liana. It's so interesting when stories overlap. I myself spent time overseas and had to deal with a lot of those caricatures that you described. But truly, I mean, through each of you, it really sounds like the experiences of growing up in these communities really reinforced this sort of sense of responsibility that you have for carrying on your community's traditions and cultural values. That's why they're still alive. It's because of people like you three who have dedicated your lives into making sure that future generations will continue to be able to carry that forward, even in spaces where visibility is sometimes challenging. I am interested, as each of you have described being in this space of advocacy for quite some time, I will open this up to the floor. So please, if you would like to answer first, please jump in. But I'd be interested to hear in what ways each of you believe the experiences and the needs of Indigenous communities living in major cities have evolved over the years since you've been in this space advocating for more visibility for quite some time. Any evolutions that you can think of?
Sure, I'd be happy to start and share a little anecdote. I think that we can all acknowledge that the Indigenous experience around the world is interconnected, and we find solidarity with one another. We are amplifying authentic representation. We've created tools and resources for our people to find their way back home. And specifically at the Urban Native Collective here in Cincinnati, we are responsible and directly accountable to our communities, to tribal nations, to our board, to our staff, to our relatives who put so much energy into our existence, to the past and to the present and to our future generations. And I feel that together through this long process, we decided that our vision was going to be united Indigenous communities, and not the sense of like pan-Indianism, but instead that we would support one another in our ability to be who we are, connected in solidarity. And over time, the experiences of Indigenous peoples here and I believe in all cities, has shifted from survival and invisibility to resilience and visibility. In earlier generations, relocation and assimilation policies left so many of our relatives isolated, disconnected from their homelands, and honestly, without resources that tribal nations do provide. But today, while many of those challenges do still remain, we have created new pathways, in solidarity. Urban Native communities are amplifying authentic representation, building intertribal community, building organizations, and creating tools for our people to reconnect to our culture, to our land, and to each other. And in Ohio, where there isn't a tribal presence, state or federally recognized, this evolution is especially visible, and our community has grown from scattered families to powerful intertribal civic community members and into a civic home.
Oh, I can just hear the pride in your voice, which is so beautiful, that you were able to see that switch from, as you said, survival to thriving. Cheryl or Liana, would you like to add to Briana's point at all?
Actually, I do, because I think it fits perfectly with what Briana just said. Is in the early years here in North Dakota, in Bismarck, North Dakota, there was an organization that was founded early on, like in the 70s, and it was the Peace Pipe Indian Center. And so we know that the peace pipe is kind of a misnomer. We have the sacred pipe, but it spoke to I think where Native people were early on in moving into the cities. And a lot of what they did at that time was mutual aid type of things. They helped with rent deposits and security deposits and all of those different types of things, food and those types of assistance. And so, but when, after the Peace Pipe Indian Center closed, there wasn't the organization serving the urban tribal population, and until we started Sacred Pipe. And immediately in starting Sacred Pipe, we knew that wasn't the primary need for our community. The primary need for our community was a voice and a way to speak to the needs that we have and navigating the systems that aren't built for us. And so I think the needs have changed over the years from just surviving in these systems to actually thriving and raising our voices and making an impact on the communities, because we are first and foremost community members. So yeah, thank you, Briana, for that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl. Liana, go for it.
Yeah, I really appreciate what both of you had said. And I am feeling really proud too to like be on this conversation with you all, folks who have really leaned into not just like navigating how we exist in this like colonial capitalist world that we live in, but how we can actually thrive and create our own systems of reciprocity and resilience within our own communities. So it's a little bit of like figuring out kind of how to play the game and how to navigate in this, but it's also on the other hand, bringing our traditional lifeways and ceremonies and practices and community care into this post-apocalyptic world, which we are living in a post-apocalyptic world as Indigenous people. That is what Indigenous futurism is all about, which I'll probably speak on later. But to see the unity coming together between Indigenous people of the diaspora, which is a really major thing, especially being here in New York City. There, in the last census, 2% of the population identified as being Indigenous in New York City. And I'm sure that does not even include all the like Taino people and Afro-Caribbean people and other folks who don't get to check or feel comfortable checking that like Native American, Alaskan Native box that they put us in. So just I feel that the needs in the city have, for urban people, urban natives have changed, or urban indigenous people has changed, in that we are really creating our own systems of survivance and thrivance and reciprocity, where we've kind of been given not much to work off of. But I do want to like kind of nod to organizations that have been doing this work and kind of fostering this seed into the growth that we've seen today. Here in New York City, we have the American Indian Community House, which has been established since 1969, and they have been a wonderful resource for urban indigenous people here. And, we can't forget AIM and how they were, kind of a result, a response and a reaction, and another group that was formed in kind of coalition with the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords and the Brown Berets, and how we have this legacy of coming together as oppressed people and joining together to create our own resources to be able to thrive and survive. And now in New York City, at least, we have a multitude of organizations, from the Urban Indigenous Collective to the American Indian Community House, to Relative Arts, and the New York Indian Council, where we're able to fill those gaps in where we aren't being served here in these urban spaces, and we are filling the needs that for our communities, so that we can continue to progress forward and not have to rely on the colonial systems that have been established for us.
Thank you so much for wrapping that up, Liana. It's beautiful to see that the thread between all three of you, hearing that your communities have been strengthened by the programming that you do or that your partner organizations do. And I really appreciate Cheryl in particular for noting that at some point there was only one organization that was, addressing these needs, whether it was your own or someone else's that you built off of. We're so privileged to have so much more resources and foundations that we can look towards, improving it continuously, because there's always more work that needs to be done. Which leads me to my next question. Again, I will open it to the floor. In recognizing that the work never ends, that needs are always evolving over time based on outside forces that we can't control, or changing forces or changing needs within our own communities as they shift and evolve on their own. What are the most pressing needs of your urban indigenous communities right now, whether they be social, political, cultural, economic? What are you hearing from your communities as the biggest priority right now?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Go for it.
It's really lovely to hear sort of about these varying interconnected urban indigenous organizations in the different cities that you all live. And Urban Native Collective is the descendant of many decades and, of organizing here in Cincinnati. And in so many ways, tragically, we are really the only entity in our region for our people. But I think for us here in Cincinnati, in the greater Cincinnati area, the most pressing need for our indigenous communities is interconnected. And so first, if there is an ongoing health gap because IHS services stop at reservation boundaries, our people in our cities often have no to little access to appropriate health care. And this is not just a health issue, but a justice issue, honestly. And we at the Urban Native Collective are working really hard to fill this gap with programming like our Pathways to Wellness initiative, which does include comprehensive mental health opportunities, fitness initiatives, gardening, seed saving, cultural programming, et cetera, et cetera. But it really is only a drop in the bucket of needs. The second, I believe, is what we face is cultural erasure every day, from mascots in Ohio having the largest, percentage of mascots in the nation, like school mascots. So erasure in our history books, in our existence, which is often framed in the past tense, which was something, we already mentioned. But our work is really about asserting authentic representation and creating these spaces where our people can feel and see themselves fully reflected. And then finally, like local policies, they really continue to affect how we live in relationship to the land here, whether that be zoning laws or regulations, ordinances, food regulations, and also development often ignore Indigenous stewardship practices. Yet we know that caring for the land and growing our own food and medicine is just absolutely vital to the survival and thriving of our communities. And so these needs are urgent, but our communities are also responding and creating those intertribal spaces here, advocating for representation, reclaiming roles as stewards, but the work is long and we're here to do it with our community together.
Beautiful. Thank you, Briana. Cheryl, Liana, does that sound similar to what you're hearing for your communities? Are there other needs that you're hearing?
I think we're kind of in the same boat. So here at Sacred Pipe, we use like a community council model where we have 6 community councils that address all the different needs, and of course they're across the board, the needs that we have. So I was kind of thinking more in terms of this question about our need, our overarching need, I think, is just the resistance. The need to resist systems that were not set up for us, that are not reflective of our values. And that includes things like our healthcare system. So as Briana mentioned, we're trying to pilot project, promote, fund a group healthcare model in our healthcare system, because a group healthcare is a more Indigenous way of doing things. So we did have our health council participate in group healthcare model, and the difference between the information that the group found, that the advocacy that they were able to do for themselves, the confidence that they got to take care of their own healthcare, their own health, all of that because they were in a social environment with other natives, and that really helped make a difference in how they received healthcare. And so taking that sort of that's just one example of the different ways that we want to try to help make systems more open to Indigenous ways of doing things, which personally I think are better overall anyway.
I'd agree with you.
But taking these systems, how we do elections, how we do youth programming, how we do the arts, and how we look at art, all of those things, like by trying to impact those systems. And we're not just, I think, making systems better by teaching Indigenous perspectives, but we're also making them more comfortable for ourselves. And it's a way of resisting and being able to reclaim and protect our own cultures, because you're continually in a state of resisting a system that is oftentimes in conflict with your value systems. So what we see a lot of times in our urban tribal communities is, oh, well, we want to include natives, so let's have you eat some Indian tacos or come and dance, or all those surface types of entertainment things. And we're continually saying, how about we educate you on treaties? How about we explain how we look at healthcare? How about we show you what Indigenous art looks like in all of its many forms? And so I think the overarching issue really is about values and representation, and resisting that the whole system that's foreign to us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, this is all really resonating with me. Sorry, jumping in again. This is like resonating, and I really appreciate everything that Briana and Cheryl have been saying. Yeah, I'm just like thinking about, this has kind of brought me to Audre Lorde's great quote of how the master's tools will never dismantle the master's home. It is, we're kind of like beyond a point. We've been beyond the point where, excuse my just being tired and fed up, but like I am so past the point of having to fight to just be recognized and seen and acknowledged. And I am like ready for us to be able to thrive and to really be able to take control of our own destinies. And it's being able to be provided the resources we have to create our own systems and lifeways, and to be able to really implement those in our communities instead of having to play again by like those colonial rules and standards that have been set for us. So I think that there are so many, like what I hear the need from my community is that there are still so many like barriers and hurdles that we have to jump in order to gain access to the resources that we need to be able to create our own self-sustainability. And just even thinking about how we can open up these systems to be able to care for the people in our community who have the most need, and broadening our idea of what indigeneity is, especially here in the United States, in Turtle Island. People are thinking about Indigenous people, and they have a pretty set way of what Indigenous people are supposed to look like or sound like, and what kind of jewelry they're supposed to wear, and what their ceremonies look like. And something that we do at Relative Arts, and that I think is really beautiful about being in such a huge urban space like New York City, is how diverse our Indigenous communities are. I'm so grateful that Briana, we have you as a representing CHamoru person from Guahan. I have been in community with other CHamoru and people from Guam, and it's been really just important to my practice of being a good community member to really like broaden my idea of what being Indigenous is, and to recognize that colonial borders do not define us, and that we share a lot of the same traditions and also the same needs. So I'm just so appreciative of that we have a collective of folks who, even though we are in disparate cities across this land, that we are all kind of like moving with the same goal and thoughts of how we can open up our community practices into a way that we can all achieve liberation.
It's through collaborations, it's working as a community that we're able to achieve that. I do want to note, it's so often that we have these panel discussions where we'll ask, what are the needs or what are the consequences of living in this reality that we're currently in. And it's really hard to pin it down because it's so all encompassing. As our communities, everything is interconnected. So it's very difficult to put a name to, natives in the city. What is the experience? It's complex, and it's difficult to single out any one particular thing. So much of our conversation also relates, we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about zoning needs. There are many other sessions that are dedicated to each of those topics as well, more in depth. So if you would like to zero in on our previous session on housing in Indian country, we do have another session for healthcare in Indian country. Please don't forget to subscribe to our NAPS YouTube channel so you can easily watch and see all of our future broadcasts and all of our past ones through any device that you use. We very much, want to dedicate enough time to really delve into each of these topics in enough time. I'm going to move into individual questions now. I'm really focused, I would like to focus on Briana's organization. Your unique origins, can you share more about what? I did do a little digging on your mission page on your website. And one phrase caught my attention, which was your setup as, quote, not just a service provider or a cultural event planner, but a civic home. Could you share more about what that means to your team?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So civic life is the ability to participate fully as a citizen. And we often don't get to have access to power or to shape the narratives of what the public knows about us as people. And we don't get to have a say in policies and a say in who speaks on our behalf oftentimes. And from a variety of different perspectives, running for office, voting in local elections, or putting together an initiative that can span across multiple organizations, like in environmental protections. And so these are all what it means to be a part of like a civic life. What we know about Natives living in Ohio comes from, the mascots and the history books and the mounds from the distant past, but we are so much an alive culture that is here today, and we deserve to have our civic lives prioritized. So in the absence of tribal nations or civic representation for our Native peoples, Urban Native Collective provides our community with a variety of programs and opportunities specifically created for Indigenous people. And so some of those include our Pathways to Wellness initiative, which I mentioned earlier. So we have the right to culturally appropriate healthcare. And we have a Native Vote program as well. Our voices need to be heard, as well as our Ohio Native Land Initiative, which works across all different areas to build power for Native people living on this land here in Ohio. We also have education and teaching curriculum and workshops as well. And all of this contributes to our civic life. And we have curated, a place where our community can gather and safely talk about and advocate for these things. We at Urban Native Collective support our community's right to be seen, to be heard, and to be fully human.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Briana. It sounds a little bit like Liana's reference to Indigenous futurism. You're putting in place strong foundations for the next 7 generations to ensure that, their voices are heard and they're allowed to be exactly who they would like to be within their own communities. I want to pass it to you, Liana, because it's so interesting to see the uniqueness of each of y'all's organizations. For you in particular, obviously I'm a little bit more familiar as I also live in the same city as you. I know as both a design studio with a brand and also a community space. I'm interested to hear more about your upcoming and inaugural Fashion Week and how that advances Indigenous futurism.
Yes, we are so excited to be presenting the very first Indigenous New York Fashion Week coming up September 11th through 15th, just in a few weeks here. I think to talk about Indigenous futurism, it might be helpful to define it a bit for anyone who hasn't ever heard this term before. So Indigenous futurism is a term that was coined by Grace Dillon in 2003. She's a professor at Portland State University, which just so happens to be my alma mater. And it is in reference to and kind of a play off of Afrofuturism. It's a creative movement across art and literature and media that reflects Indigenous perspectives on past, present, and future, and involves confronting the impacts of colonization and releasing the emotional and psychological weight of its effect and reconnecting to ancestral traditions to adapt in a post-colonial world. So what we do at Relative Arts is we don't put a limit on what Indigenous people can contribute to to our recognition and creativity in our contemporary modern world. We focus again on bringing in contemporary artists and designers who are making art and living now, again, so that we can take ourselves out of this historicized context and being only presented in museums as people who once lived and are now few and far between. So we're very proud to have almost 70 now, and different Indigenous designers of across mediums and formats presented in our shop. And because our store does focus a lot on clothing, there's a lot of Indigenous fashion going on. We wanted to be able to have a showcase and a spotlight on these contemporary artists who are making moves and really kicking down the doors in these spaces to shout, to proclaim, like, we are here and we are creating really, really dope and beautiful stuff in these contemporary moments and days. So our inaugural Fashion Week, like I said, happening just in a few weeks, running concurrently with New York Fashion Week, which is very intentional for us. We didn't want to be in competition with New York Fashion Week, but we wanted to be able to offer an alternative option for people who wanted to specifically support the Indigenous creative movement in fashion and design today. So we've got about 25 designers who are going to be presented and having showcases during our fashion runways. We've got one jewelry specific show, which was really important to us because we all know that jewelry and that type of adornment has always been important to our Indigenous people, and we wanted to give jewelry its own spotlight to be able to shine. And what we're doing with Indigenous New York Fashion Week is we are really dedicated to making sure that every aspect of it is Indigenous led. So all of our hair and makeup team are Indigenous. A majority of our models ended up being Indigenous, and we did just a general open call, but we had such an overwhelming response that we were able to cast mostly Indigenous models for our runways. And most of our team leads are also Indigenous, from set production to hair and makeup, like I mentioned, to we're going to be having live concerts and different programming throughout the week. So I think it's just really a testament to how we are still here and we are fully capable of creating these spaces for our community. And again, just like we are not just surviving, but we're creating new systems for us to be able to thrive and to be able to support one another. The ethos, the constant mantra of Relative Arts is community over competition. We are here to create a space that doesn't have us acting as crabs in a bucket, pulling each other down, but more as if one of us makes it, through the doors, it gets a seat at the table, then we are, holding the elevator door open so that we can all shoot to the top together, because we know that we know the best ways to be able to care for ourselves, to create these safe spaces, to prevent extraction and the white gaze from being how we have to continue to navigate through these systems. Again, it's just all about creating our own joy, our own celebration, and our own systems. And just another bit, because I brought that word joy into it, that is part of the mission statement of Relative Arts. We are this design studio. We are a shop. We are a community space. And one of the very important tenets of the work that we do is to have celebration and to have joy. Relative Arts was born out of direct action and grassroots movements, which can anyone who's been out in those streets can cause a lot of burnout. And when you're constantly struggling to be seen or to survive, then it can create burnout. And we really wanted to create a safe space for us to actually have these soft and tender moments where we get to care for one another and we get to celebrate and we get to have joy, and we're not always just seen as the victims or the people who are struggling or the angry BIPOCs. We really wanted to be able to create a space that was for us and by us, for our community and by our community, so that we we could celebrate what really makes our community unique and beautiful and interwoven and interconnected together. So yeah, with Indigenous New York Fashion Week, we are hoping to just like really kick down the doors of expectation for us, and to say like, we are not just like here, and we're not just going to have one showcase during New York Fashion Week. Please, will you let us in the door? We are creating our own space that is completely run by us, with the intention of asserting ourselves as people who can thrive in all of these different spaces.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Liana. I am so incredibly excited. If anyone is in the New York City metropolitan area, we will have more information on how to get tickets to this fashion show towards the end of our broadcast, so please stay tuned. Yes, very excited for Relative Arts NYC's new initiative. Cheryl, I'm going to pass it to you. As, again, a very unique organization that we've already established has focused more on addressing pre-existing servicing gaps. So more on what needs to be addressed rather than focusing on what perhaps other organizations are now also doing. What are some lessons that you'd like to share with our membership right now about choosing to center your work on addressing these pre-existing service gaps?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of amplify in this forum Native Americans in philanthropy and your leadership in just letting the world of philanthropy know how important it is to fund this work, not only to fund this work, but to fund it in a way that allows us to be creative with our responses in community, because it is really difficult. Like a Sacred Pike Resource Center, we are almost 100% foundation funded, because what we've been finding is foundations tend to be more open to creativity. Federal grants, state grants are not for the creative. So it's really difficult for us to access that type of funding and really respond to the gaps in service and to the needs of our the unique needs of our community. I think one of the things I would like people to know, one of the lessons we've learned, like every community is different, and even in a really homogenous state like North Dakota, the needs that we see in Bismarck, for example, are very different from our sister organization like Indigenous Association in Fargo, and it's a different community. We're Indigenous, we're largely the same tribes, but the needs are different, the services are different, the resources are different. And so our programming has to be very different from their programming. And I think that's something that, like Briana had talked about, the diversity of our tribes in this nation. We're still very diverse, and we still have a lot of very diverse needs. And so we have to be able to pivot very quickly. We have to be able to respond to different issues that come up in our communities, or different needs that come up in our communities. And that really requires, flexible funding, and funding where we can pivot quickly, and we can respond to things that are happening in our community. And that's probably one of the biggest needs and differences I see with the urban tribal population versus our on-reservation relatives, and the needs that they have and the programs that they can create. It's a little more, we have to be a little more nimble out in the urban tribal communities and in these bigger cities. And so, again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the members of this organization and potential funders about how important that is. We work very closely with the National Urban Indian Family Coalition, which has been a great advocacy organization for urban Indian organizations. And I think that's part of their advocacy too, is letting people know that even though, we have that commonality of all being Indigenous, that we still have a significant amount of diversity in our nations.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Go for it, Liana.
I wanted to just add to that, Cheryl. Thanks for bringing up just like how difficult it can be to navigate receiving the funding and applying for the funding that we need to support our communities and our organizations. Something that we're continually confronted with at Relative Arts is, well, on one hand, we are an LLC, which is not an easily funded model, but from different foundations and organizations. And we were very intentional in choosing to go that route because we do work with, dozens and dozens of different vendors and artists, and the main goal was for them to be able to make money, right? And we also see that there are all these other Indigenous organizations that are already taking the nonprofit route, and we felt like that need was fulfilled. And we are trying to kind of break out of the idea that if there's going to be an Indigenous-led organization, that it must be a nonprofit. We wanted to kind of just take a different path. And it has been a little bit of a struggle, but I think that it has also caused us to slow down in the way that we grow, in a way that's more manageable for us, or the idea of Relative Arts and all the support around us is just like, it's on fire. Like, the word is getting out, people are very supportive in general, but one of the hardest things that we have encountered is finding folks and organizations who want to fund the work that we are doing, that are not at odds with our with how we want to move through the world. And what I mean by that is, we have been approached by banks and huge, multinational conglomerates who have been like, oh, maybe we'll throw some money at you for this, or like whatever, if you want to come and speak at our thing. And it has been really hard to find donors and organizations who want to fund us, who share our ethics, and will not make us, in turn, from accepting those donations or funds, feel like we are kind of assuaging their guilt, or like letting them kind of like plow over the fact that their organization has caused tons of environmental harm or harm to our direct community. So being able to present and speak directly to NAP members is just really, really awesome, because I have this like sense that you all are a group of folks who are already like share our ethos and our ethics. And that is one of the greatest challenges, I think, that we might face in being able to grow at the rate that other organizations are able to grow up, because they don't necessarily have that like base level of ethics. And as Cheryl, as you were saying, like the federal grants, the state grants, they don't allow for much creativity. And we need to be able to have the sovereignty in our making these collectives and organizations and whatever it is that we do, to be able to filter like where our funding comes from and how we are able to allocate it. Because again, it's the master's tools not being able to dismantle the master's house, right? We need to be able to take these tools and to have the sovereignty and autonomy to be able to decide how they're going to best serve us. So thanks, Cheryl, for what you were saying. I just wanted to piggyback on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for jumping in, Liana. And we always like to close these discussions out with essentially a call to action. So I'm so glad that you jumped in, essentially calling to make sure that if you're choosing to support an organization through funding, you have to first ensure that your missions align, that you're on the same paths, and that you recognize that oftentimes you will not be in a position of power. The organizations that you're supporting have that power to decide, again, self-determination, what they would like to do and move forward with. As we wrap up this conversation, I realize we're at the top of the hour here, but I would like to also give Briana and Cheryl a chance to say a closing word here. Again, our network spans the entire public sector and beyond. We have funders and Native nonprofits, peer organizations, elected officials, budding future leaders who may be watching. What is something that they can do, and what's your closing call to action for them? Briana, why don't I'll pass it to you first.
Okay, great. And Liana, thank you so much. You underscored so many things that I feel like I want to, echo and reiterate. But I do to close, want to address something that's really important to us in these specific times. We do not need more surveillance. And what I mean by that is the time that we're living in right now, where people of color are consistently surveilled, treated as suspicious, questioned, not trusted. That same mentality seeps into philanthropy when funders design reporting requirements that assume that we are not responsible stewards of resources. When Indigenous organizations are asked to overprove their legitimacy, it mirrors broader systems of surveillance that our communities already endure in schools and in workplaces and public spaces. So philanthropy must choose a different path, rooted in trust, in respect, in relationship, rather than suspicion, because we do not need endless hoops to jump through. We need more partners, we need more collaborators, we need more relationships. And to close, the Urban Native Collective is crucial to our community here in Ohio. And we are expanding, and we are in a place that is ground zero for colonization and for removal, and feel strongly that if we can indigenize this space here in Cincinnati, Ohio, can find healing and connection here in this place, it's possible for every urban Native community across Turtle Island. So to close, we ask ourselves, how do you overcome, divide, and conquer? You come together, and we would like philanthropy to join us. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Briana. That is a perfect sum up of the exact work that Native Americans in philanthropy is doing, transforming a colonized field to make sure that our communities come first. So I really appreciate that call out. Cheryl, I'll pass it to you for any call to actions that you would like to give to our network of members right now.
Yeah, I think it's great what Briana was just saying, because that's kind of what I was thinking. The same thing is, we're relationship people. Indigenous people are relationship people. You know, you go to any place in the big city, and you know, the first question, if they know you're Native or recognize you're Native, the first question is like, where you from? And then the next question is, oh, who you're related to, and then pretty soon you're like, oh, cousin, we're cousins. And that connection, I think, is what's really critical for funders to know, especially in philanthropy and in supporting urban tribal organizations, because there are a lot of organizations out there that are that say they work on behalf of Indigenous communities, and Indigenous communities don't really see any benefit from them. And so the only way to be able to sift through that and understand who's actually really working in community with community is by creating those relationships and really understanding who's doing the actual work in community. So I think that's really, I guess, one of the things that I would like to say. We as Indigenous people, that this, anywhere you go in this Turtle Island is Indigenous land. So we see people like who come into our communities, our urban tribal communities, and then they go back to their homelands, and then they come back again, and another generation comes and lives in an urban center, and then they go back to their homeland. So that we're always, you know, we're still nomadic people. Like, we're still always moving and going into different spaces. And I think it's important for philanthropy to know that, because you know, the stereotype is that we're on reservations, and we're not. We're everywhere. And but going into the communities and knowing who is actually working with community rather than on behalf of, I think is important for philanthropy to know, because that's how you make significant change, is you work with community and not on behalf of. So that would be my only closing point. Yeah. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to both you, Cheryl, and to Briana, Liana, Ahet, Nitsago, for all of your words, your time today, for joining this conversation. As we come to a close, I do want to take a moment to reiterate my deep gratitude, our team's gratitude for your time today, for sharing your insights, and truly for the continued dedication for the work that you do every day to strengthen your Native communities and communities across Indian country. I've learned a lot from the lessons shared here today, as I always do in these webinars. And it's reminded, I think, all of us that urban Indigenous peoples are not a recent phenomenon or a new trend. We have always existed in large cities, and now more than ever are building a future grounded in both the wisdom of our ancestors and the needs of our present and future. So to everyone in the audience, thank you so much for your time, for your attentiveness, and your willingness to learn from the stories and voices that make up this vibrant community. The conversation does not end here, so I hope this discussion inspires each of you to think more deeply about the ways in which we can support and uplift urban Indigenous peoples moving forward. Thank you all for your time. As you know, this session was an exclusive offering to our membership as part of our network's benefits. And it is truly because of your dedication to meaningful connection and collective learning that Native Americans in Philanthropy is able to continuing offering these resources and more tools to push the sector forward. If you have any questions or would like to have more information on your membership benefits, you can always email our team at membership@philanthropy.org, nativephilanthropy.org, excuse me. As we wrap up our third MEC session this year, please note that you will receive an email with a link to a short survey. It'll only take about 3 or 4 minutes to complete, but it does provide invaluable feedback that guides our program's design and direction. So we really encourage you to share your thoughts on this panel and what you'd like to gain from our future webinars. Make sure to join us again next month as we dedicate September's member education session to the cornerstone of our work, our members. The relationships and connections that we've built across Indian country make the heart of NAP's work possible. So during this session, we will pass the mic to several of our impactful partners who will share their experiences as members of our network. So make sure to mark your calendars for the NAP Effect, Stories from Our Members on September 17th. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. Again, Ahiahet Nitsago to all who joined us here today. We hope you take the lessons learned forward in a good way. Hagonet.